Now we're really here. So welcome to our water workshop. It is Tuesday, April 16th. It is 6:30 p.m. We are here at 2 Castle Valley Drive and also on Zoom. This is a workshop for the town council, the Castle Valley Planning Commission, and our water advisory committee to go over some work that the water advisory committee has been doing. So I appreciate the public being here. I just want to note that this is not a meeting, so we're not taking public input or questions tonight. If we have time for council and planning commission questions, we will take those. We're mostly introducing some information primarily. So if you're getting questions while we're talking, please write them down. If we aren't able to come back to them, our next workshops can delve in deeper because we've got quite a bit of stuff there to talk about. Does everyone know each other? Do we need introductions? We all know John Brew, our water agent, and Pam Hackley is part of our water advisory committee, as well as Obi Bob O'Brien, who is also a member of the town council. We have Colleen Thompson here is our interim planning commission clerk. George A. Honer, a planning commissioner. Pamela Gibson is one of our town council members. Tori Hill online, also a town council member. So we'll go ahead. I don't know who the phone number is. Okay. Oh, and Dave Early, also a member of our water advisory.
You're here, right?
He just popped in. You can jump up to the table if you can, please. Okay, we do have our agenda kind of laid out. So I'll go ahead and let John take it away.
All right. Maybe it's sort of a brief history of the Water Advisory Committee. It was formed, lose track of time, a few years ago when I approached Jasmine and said, look, I'm supposed to be dealing with water rights, but there's all these issues pertaining to water that are kind of piling up, and we need other expertise and energy. And at that time, we just simply formed the Water Advisory Committee to basically meet, discuss, and work through various issues pertaining to water. And the real motivator for it was Jasmine's direction that we created a water management plan. The town has never had an official water management plan, and now is a good time for it. And we went to work on that. We have an outline, we've written part of it, and I guess the main purpose of this meeting is to share essentially the ideas that we are going to have in the plan and get guidance from the council and the pluck and answer any questions we have so that we can continue our work heading in the right direction. So that essentially is it's our main focus of our work as the Water Advisory Committee. I guess another important thing that is currently occurring is the water budget study that is being done in Castle Valley in cooperation with the Utah Geologic Survey. This is kind of in the wake of the HESA studies that were done by Ken Coleman and Paul Vanderheide in the years 2016 through 2020 in different installments. And subsequent meetings with the Division of Water Rights indicated some other things that were that's important for us to know about the aquifer. And we arranged, again, with the help of Janae Wallace, who's been very good to Castle Valley over the years, from Utah Geologic Survey, put together a proposal for this water budget study, which is involving measuring wells, sampling wells, and also sampling for typical water chemistry, and also sampling for isotopes, which will help map the path of the water through the valley, its sources and where it moves and how it mingles, and answer important questions. And we'll get, I'll get to that in more detail further down the agenda. And I guess the other big item, it's again, this is rolled into the water management plan, but it also will involve an update of an existing ordinance, and that is for the watershed protection ordinance. And what the town has on its books for protecting the watershed. And so that essentially are the important current elements that are, you know, the Water Advisory Committee is working on. So that was kind of general introduction. I will now talk about, we'll all take turns, or I'll do most of the talking, but we'll talk about the key issues that the Water Advisory Committee is addressing. And I guess the first one is a big motivation for all this is to be able to influence policy, the policy of the Division of Water Rights as it pertains to Castle Valley. We believe that the aquifer should be closed to further appropriations. I think Mark Stilson probably, and his heart of hearts agrees with it, but you cannot do such a thing or even advance such an idea without enough evidence for the need. So the purpose of the water budget study and much of what we're doing is to try and determine the safe yield of the Castle Valley aquifer. And that does not simply mean the total amount of water that is sustainably available from the aquifer. It means the amount of water that's usable for typical purposes from the aquifer. As most of you are probably aware, the further you get up on the hillside, the poorer the quality of the water becomes, to the point where it's virtually unusable for any typical purpose, domestic growing plants or anything like that. And the HESA studies done by Ken Coleman and Paul Tenderheide identified the possible risk of if withdrawals in the middle of the valley where the water is good become too great, it could pull in this poor quality water. And so the excuse me, the water, determining the safe yield, it will be a big product of this water budget study, in that it will determine how much can be sustainably withdrawn from the aquifer. So, you know, A, how much is there, and B, how much can be withdrawn, how much good quality water can be withdrawn without running the risk of reducing its quality. And again, this was what an idea, this was a result of the HESA studies, and this is what we're pursuing with the water budget study. And when it's all completed, hopefully we will have a map of our aquifer and a dynamic model which answers many of these questions, and more importantly, which is sufficient evidence for Division of Water Rights to guide its policy. Any questions on that from anybody?
Well, I'd just say that the quantity determinations are also based on quality. So the determination of what safe yield isn't just what you can take out from a physical standpoint of water, but what you can take out without degrading the quality of the rest of the water. So in our case, that's pretty important. I would say, secondly, that it's easier to prove quantity issues than quality issues. So that's a little bit of our challenge, is that most of our degradation isn't about quantity, it's about influence, and what's the level of influence between how much can come down the valley and come in from the sides. So right now we have plenty of water, it would appear, to dilute in the middle of the valley, but at what point is the great concern. But again, the statute allows you to do more than just quantity, it allows to protect the quality, which is an important thing in our case.
And not to be off issue, but it does look like Stilson et al. Takes seriously this issue, certainly in the wetlands over in Moab, because they've got salty water down below, briny water down below. They need fresh water going on top, otherwise that would come up and kill the wetlands area. And they've been studying that issue and putting in wells and monitoring. So it's an argument that carries some weight.
Yes, and Mark and the folks in Price are well aware of our aquifer and how different water sources interact and what that risk could be. I note on the agenda here, we've discussed the studies we've done, what we're doing. And possible future studies. I don't know what they would be. I tend to think this water budget study we're doing now will be thorough enough that it will have to have some influence. We've had some, what would I call it, disagreements with Mark over the fact that we do a study, then the goalposts get moved, that what he says he needs keeps getting a little, it's the carrot and the stick, and but I talked to Janae about that. She has talked with him informally. And if we follow through and with that water budget study, I feel like we'll be armed with the information we need. Is there any more questions about those things from anybody?
What is the timeline of the water budget?
Well, speed costs money. How fast do you want to go? That's my way of saying that it will depend largely on what the town is willing and able to fund. And I actually have lost track of how far the future is now funded. Certainly we did water level measurements and sampling last fall. They were done this spring. They're scheduled for this fall. I really don't know, but of course, the more measurements and samples you take at intervals, the better your data becomes. But again, it will depend on, I think it will depend on the results we see that we're getting and any need we feel there is for more study. But I guess the point there is it would be the same study. I don't see going some different direction or starting over with something else. This is the thing we're going to want to see through fully and to get the results we want.
John, I have a question. Is that the?
I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Can you say the questions?
Oh, he asked if there were any questions from anywhere.
I'm sorry. I thought I was trying to be clear in the beginning that this was just a workshop and we weren't taking public. Sorry.
You can write it down. I can talk afterwards.
Just ask that everybody, please write your questions down because they will be answered later.
And Jocelyn, also an answer to the question, I think Mark does want to know how much water is coming out of the valley, and it looks like we're gonna get funded by the state for this partial flume, which will help. Probably we need one telling us how much is coming in. And there is one more well on the list that we potentially should have over sort of across the bridge across Castle Creek on Schaefer. That I know of. And then maybe a little bit.
No, I mean, there are some ideas for that. And that gets into the next item on the agenda, which is maintaining the safe yield of the Castle Valley Aquifer, and that refers to quantity and quality. Currently, there are 6 wells that were drilled back in 2006 with a grant by the town with funding from the CIB, and they're dedicated monitoring wells. And the Utah Geologic Survey, the town contracts with the UGS to come down twice a year and sample those wells. They measure the static level and they take a sample for chemistry analysis. And that there was a period of time, 2009, there was a period when they weren't sampled, but they've been sampled consistently for the last several years. And I would certainly recommend that be continued. We get a very good price from the UGS, and that's very valuable data, especially because again, it's over time. I mean, you can watch trends occur.
John, can I add to that?
Sure.
Monitoring wells are critical. Dedicated monitoring wells that are never pumped are critical, because if you ever have to defend your aquifer in a hearing with the state engineer's office, the Division of Water Rights, they're not going to take this other data where wells that are pumped. So we're doing a study now that's recreating and going further than a study that was done along, well, the 90s, I believe, And that's testing a bunch of static levels and stuff in a bunch of our wells, which gives a nice idea of what the aquifer looks like underground. You're trying to take a picture of what's down there. All right, so that does a really nice job of giving us all these depths. But those are one-off every 20 years right now. How often? Okay. The monitoring wells are every year, twice a year. They're telling us what's going on in our aquifer as far as our groundwater. There's a reason we're not all panicking through these droughts, because we're actually doing quite well in our groundwater. Our monitoring wells are not moving that much
So far,
And OB has identified spot number 7, which would be out near the end of Schaefer Lane, which is basically where the pool starts, where the losing section of Castle Creek loses. And would be right in that area, giving us a pretty good idea of what's going on with the upper end of our pool. The lower end of our pool is all of our wells, so we're finding out what's going on there. Okay, so just for the public on the internet and the rest of the audience, that's kind of the difference between ongoing monitoring wells that the town maintains, which measure the groundwater, doing a one-off every so often test of what our aquifer looks like under us, so we can correlate it to what those other measurements are. And then the top and bottom in Castle Creek. And we, I think, should understand, as a small community, we are so far ahead of the rest of the state of Utah. As a result, there's all sorts of legislature moving through and putting out what money for things like the flume down here, that people in this room had influence in getting this done by attending meetings, and providing comment. But the point is, this community is in such a place, they're so impressed that we already have these monitoring wells from 2006, that we can take advantage of that, I think. And that's part of the reason we're all here, is there is an opportunity if we can kind of, the whole thing's coalesced with climate change, and here we are today. I could talk about Mark Stilson's change in mentality since I first was mayor. That's outside this meeting. It's worth talking about if anybody's interested. But this is a transition with climate change and the impacts of it on Great Salt Lake and Colorado River.
okay. Yeah, so I mean, essentially, back to the point of the importance of maintaining the safe yield and understanding what that means. We do currently have the 6 monitoring wells. There has been a recommendation. We had a 7th in a particular area, basically where Schaefer Lane intersects Castle Creek. I think there's a well down there that we may not have to drill a well. There's a well that a property owner has abandoned right in that very area. And I think he would be amenable perhaps to having that be converted to a monitoring well. That remains to be seen, but the point is that opportunity exists. The other important element in following through on this water budget study and understanding the dynamics of the Castle Valley Aquifer are gauging stations on Castle Creek. We did have them back in the 90s as part of a study that was sponsored by Division of Water Rights, and the gauging stations were put in by the United States Geologic Service. We've identified that as an important future need, and just last week heard it was a very pleasant surprise. We got an email indicating that the Colorado River Authority of Utah is funding the installation of 10 gauges on tributary streams around the state, and Catholic Creek is one of them. They're down at the lower end, just probably right where the old one was. And we would, as Obi said, it'd be very nice to have one at the upper end of the valley, but if you're going to have one or the other, that's the place to have it. And then this is a real, it was like Castle Valley's birthday party.
And I honestly,
No, this is tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And I think there'll be money available next year, and we need to be shovel ready with the upper spot. And in October, I attended a meeting of the Colorado River Authority, Utah, in Moab for everybody here because we couldn't attend. These guys were busy. And the woman who runs it said she had to hear the legislature and she wanted to know what they needed to fund. And it was like, I'm not bashful, I know exactly, you can't have a water bank if you don't know what's. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't, and so the state's passing all this legislation for water banking to free up water, but we don't know what's in the bank. So I said, you need to put money into monitoring, and sure enough, she said she had the ear of them. I was kind of like, really? Am I ever gonna pay off being an activist? And all of a sudden, 10 well, and these are not 10 streams in Utah, these are 10 streams on the Colorado River basin, John. I'm pretty sure it's all southeast
Yeah, it's
Utah.
all tributaries of the Colorado.
So,
Ranging from Muddy Creek to Cottonwood Creek over near Farron and Castledale, all the things that spill into the Dirty Devil. But clearly, yes, because that's the concern is the river. Anyway, but that's essentially, I think that the town should, for its great benefit, plan to fund continued monitoring indefinitely. And that doesn't, I mean, again, I think what the Utah Geologic Survey does this twice annual measuring and sampling for, there's a contract price they draw up, but they take half of it. The town only pays half of the actual cost of this monitoring. And I don't know if that will last forever, but again, the monitoring, I think, is literally priceless in terms of protecting the aquifer.
on two levels. One, you can defend yourself. And the second, it's like bears looking for a campsite to go raid. You go for the low hanging fruit. And if we're a community that obviously is looking out for ourselves, we're going to attract less attention.
And I'll just add that a couple of years ago, at Janae's suggestion, they took a sample and analyzed it for VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And they're not doing that ongoingly, but she said it's good to get a baseline. Because if somebody ever proposes drilling or similar activities in this area, you could see immediately an effect that would have, because you'd have a baseline, you'd see any change. The other thing that's it's a relevance to Castle Valley is every fall, the fall samples are tested for phosphates, which would be an early indicator of septic system contamination. We'll get to this further down, but Castle Valley is a sole source aquifer, and so there's no plan B, which is why it's very important to maintain the quality and safety of the water. Any more questions from the flux of the council?
Right, you get your chance.
Now, one that's near and dear to my heart. Accounting for the use of town of Castle Valley water rights in the 21st century. Now it's a pretty loose operation with the state. I think that's going to change. I think that I expect there to be much more stringent water use accounting requirements in the future as water supplies in the West tighten, particularly on the Colorado River. I think that any water providing entity, or for that matter, any water user is going to be subject to much more stringent requirements for documenting, for being able to measure the water use. As just watching Lake Powell Fall, you know it's going to come to that. And essentially right now, it's to the extent that it's done at all, it's done with a survey of a lot. This is what happened during the adjudication. Many of you experienced it. It was done by Division of Water Rights at that time. They would come on the lot and measure areas of water use, lawns, gardens, fields, trees, and apply an irrigation duty of 6 acre-feet per acre and come up with a number. This is the water use. It's very hypothetical and not at all realistic, really. Back in the study of the Division of Water Rights did back in the 1990s, they did put totalizing meters on some wells and measured it water use for a year, and right down the middle, every place they did that, the water use proved to be about half what the water rights were. And again, I think as there's more pressure on water locally, regionally, from here to the Pacific, they're gonna want a more exact reckoning of water use. And that's gonna fall, with respect to town water rights, it's gonna fall to the town to do that. And really, there's two choices, one of which is lot surveys, but again, we haven't, when we came out with the updated water use agreement, we asked people to fill out a water use accounting form. That's not gonna cut it, if only because people, I'm not sure, didn't really know what to expect or how to fill it out. This is what I discovered when I read through them. And in other words, the town will have to go out and do its own adjudications every certain number of years, where some representative from the town will have to go measure, like the state has done. But again, I think even that will, in time, prove to be insufficient to meet requirements. The time, I don't know, but I just think it's not a matter of if, it's when.
Well, and John, there's gonna come a time when the labor to do that's gonna be more expensive than the meters to put.
We're getting to that, now, because I think the Castle Valley wants to stay ahead of what I'm sure are gonna be future requirements. It should begin metering the wells that use town of Castle Valley water rights.
And John, as long as you've opened that, maybe you talk about the different options in metering, because I think that's really important.
Give me time.
Good enough.
The progress. Yeah, I mean, essentially. It's my feeling that the town should, in the very near future, implement metering of wells using town water rights. There will be an additional benefit to that in that the town can then convert its water rights to municipal and report its use as one lump number every year in gallons rather than so many acres of this and then domestic uses, and it will streamline and I guess modernize our method of accounting and reporting. Now, of course, when I talk about metering, I think we can agree at this point it's probably impractical and not even really advisable to try and put in typical meters that would involve digging up every water line from every well that uses a town water right. It would be very disruptive to lots, and those meters, for the most part, can be problematic in water that's unfiltered. What I've been looking into, and we'll look into some more, is what is called totalizers. There's, again, back in the 1990s study, they used a pipe that was clamped to an outlet pipe from the well, and it sensed vibration when the pump was on. Essentially, what it did was it measured the amount of time the pump was running. And that, coupled with a pump test of the well, you could easily calculate the amount of water that had been used. I haven't, again, I need to research it further, but I've heard of totalizers that essentially are electric meters that you would put on the in the hot wire of the wiring that goes to your well pump. And similarly, it would record the amount of time the pump is running, the amount of time the current is running through that meter. So you end up with a time of 62 hours and 42 minutes. You know,
Hobbs meter would be very cheap.
do you think?
A Hobbs meter would be very cheap.
Who?
It's called a Hobbs meter. It's what airplanes have. It's a little meter that whenever the electricity is on, whatever voltage
Right.
it's set at, or you buy it for, then it just records time.
Indeed, and it's easy to install, and it's not, I'm assuming, not terribly disruptive of someone's current.
Not at all. Just getting it on there well without getting shot.
Well,
We'll hire you to do that thing.
People like me.
But you get the idea, that it is possible. It's possible to retroactively meter what we're already doing. I think fairly inexpensively and efficiently. And again, Mark Stilson has indicated he would approve of these methods. You would have to, again, get a number per time, and to be a pump test on the well. And he said that for wells that have driller's logs that did a pump test, that number would be acceptable. I think we're gonna have to do it, and I think we have the means to do it without a great disruption or a great expense.
And the benefit of doing it is if we get this done, we're a maven. And
Who?
a maven is a marketing term of we're ahead of everybody else in southern Utah or in Utah, especially small
You
communities.
mean we're on the cutting edge?
We're on the cutting edge. And when I went as to the CIB, I learned quite frankly how the rest of the state looks at us. Which, you know, Greg Holiday, there could be no self-respecting American veteran living in Castle Valley was the comment from the CIB. I learned that actually maybe this is an opportunity. I think Mark Stilson sees it too. So as long as we can keep doing it and stay cutting edge, he can go to the rest of the communities around here and say, well, Castle Valley can do it. They're doing it. So
If those misfits can do it,
anyway, so hopefully we're on the cutting edge and we can keep getting funding for more things like the upper gauge next year and. That's the idea.
I guess the fundamental message is that we should plan to meter. It's
The legislation that I've been watching for the past 2 years at least has been going in this direction. Some places they're already implementing.
And anytime we want to do a change application or anything, we have to put a meter in to satisfy them. This is.
right, that would become a requirement for a water use agreement and permit. I think it's just not, it's a matter of time, and again, I don't know how much time, but a matter of time before even individual wells. Private wells with state issued rights will have to meter in some form or fashion.
And John, it also, so rumors don't get started. In no way does this mean that somehow there's gonna be cutbacks on what people are using in water right now, because we're all right now. We just, you know, we gotta know what we're doing so we can quantify it.
The more we use now, the more rights we're gonna have in the future when the town is saturated with homes.
Yep, well, that's,
Use it or lose it.
that topic is coming up.
Sorry.
Because that may be the most interesting topic of the evening. So that's, I think that's all, unless there's questions from the council or Pluck on that.
Tori, I saw a hand at one point. Did you have something?
He answered it.
Good. No, but you know, I think all of us to some degree stay aware of current events and we've had a couple decent years, but I think the long-term trend is pretty clear, if not as a result of climate change, certainly of increased population in the Western US. The pressure is going to be on water supplies forever.
And John, in that pause, I think a shout out's due to our mayor. She's been every legislative session. She screens and looks at all these bills and sends us along the stuff we have to look at, but she's looking out for this community on that level with the legislature. Much appreciated.
It's so much.
It's.
I think that's-
Anybody wants to help any other
I
eye.
think it's overwhelmed because it's such stimulating reading.
Oh. The best. You'll definitely sleep well then.
You haven't lived to read some Utah legislation.
Maybe
It's a
some.
real page turner, right? All right, well, unless there's more on that, I'm gonna assume that the direction of the council would be to pursue this.
Well, we're not making decisions here, but we're.
I know, but I'm seeking guidance because there's work to be done and I don't wanna do work to no avail. Or for that matter, write stuff into the plan that's not gonna,
Well, I think it doesn't make sense to me to have a plan without some way to.
See what we're using.
it's about addressing about addressing the future and being proactive.
Like drawing pictures of their grass is not.
I'll say another thing, if we can get to municipal status. We'll get beyond being so personality dependent with all this in this valley, and that's to John and I, one of the biggest gifts we can give back to the community is to make the water work. Without somebody who just. I mean, This man right here.
The idea is to leave
Our Father
behind
and
a
Savior.
system into which you can plug any reasonably competent person and it'll be workable.
And it's the way everybody else does it. So for the state, we are no longer such a square peg in a round hole. We're much more around.
Things are going, that there's likely going to be money for funding meter.
Oh, I
think that we're gonna
agree
be able
completely.
to Go for grants. I don't think it's like a matter of, we're gonna charge everybody to do this on their own. I think we're gonna be able to help it happen.
We simply can't charge the retroactive, the retrofitting of meters on wells that are already using Castle Valley water rights, the town will have to fund.
Or
And then we make it a
grants for-
requirement of a water use permit, and then we can provide people with, you know, product, you know, references for products and methods and let them decide. All right, this is great, because now I can stop talking for a bit. Watershed protection, which Dave and Obi have been focusing on. And they can use their words to describe it again, but it's important to emphasize. Castle Valley is one of not very many EPA designated sole source aquifers in the US. Meaning that our water comes from one place and one place only without any alternative.
And until like last year, we were the only community without a municipal well that had that status in the whole country that was relying on our individual straws. I believe there's a community near Laramie, Wyoming that got the status, and they used our application and stuff as their blueprint for getting theirs, so just a little add-on to no.
All right, I want you, well, we talk about updating
Want to go ahead, Dave? Start.
Yeah, we'll get, why don't you cover sole source when we get into it, and I'll give a little overview. So when you get to the idea of watershed protection in Castle Valley, first, there's the town that has jurisdiction over the town, so that's our place. There's some state law that gives us some rights outside of our boundaries, but those are somewhat limited and somewhat depend upon things like perhaps having a municipal well to defend. All right. Then obviously the next is the BLM, large landowner in the valley that has their regulations from a federal level, their Department of Interior. Then the Forest Service is Department of Agriculture. They have their own permits and permitting or regulations and system and guidance. And then there's Sitla that owns now, I believe, 480 acres of land in the valley. And from the time that John and I were here and Bill Hedden and Laura Kamala and all sorts of things went on. With a lot of help from the Nature Conservancy and Utah Open Lands, we're down to from over 4,000 acres. I've got the maps of land ownership from pre and after. So we're down from over 4,000 acres of Sitla down to 480. So that's a extremely good situation for us, so that we're, you know, we still have to deal with them, but it's a lot less. So from an overview standpoint, what we decided to do was try and go through each agency and what their regulations are for watershed protection. Obi, you want to take over and go over what you did?
Sure. So, well, there is its designation to make it the sole source aquifer. That's very nice. The EPA said it. We get more than 50% of our water from just one source. The kind of problem is that it doesn't come with much protection unless whatever's going on up there is federally funded. Pam knows more about this than I do to chip in. So it's a very nice thing to have. It's a great thing to argue, saying this is our sole source of drinking water, but not a lot of protection unless the development is federally funded in some way.
However, to add to that, the feds can use a categorical exclusion.
Yep.
To get around sole source aquifers. So the Forest Service has gotten in the habit of limiting the amount of acres for like the Willow Basin fuel treatment that happened a few years ago. so that it didn't have to go through the filter. But I think it's still, it's an informal filter because we've been engaged with the agency, and so they were putting forward ideas that have already been accepted by the town as being the kind of fuels reduction we could accept. You know, the mosaic, how they did it, okay. So the sole source is not as protective as it sounds, yet the town has been effective in using it because of the relationship with the agencies. Go on.
But it interestingly intersects, so this is a wonderful thing that when you get to do something like this. I was also supposed to look at Grand County protections. And, you know, they actually have some really nice protections. Not yet. For the water source protection overlay district. And I'm just gonna, I'll read just one quick section of it and show you how little we'd have to change words in this. The WSPO, that's the Water Source Protection Overlay District, is an overlay district intended to protect groundwater and recharge basins for current and future public culinary water supplies in Grand County. To this end, the WSPO district shall apply recharge areas designated to the US EPA sole source aquifer area. This is the awful word, and approved by the Utah Division of Drinking Water or other resource-specific studies of the state engineer. We don't get that qualification because we are not a public water supplier.
We are,
Then we are not a public water provider. That's what keeps us.
there's public water supplier
Yeah.
and there's municipal water provider.
But
That's right.
that one term sentence at the end, maybe Mark Stilson would be willing to work with us.
He might be, I'm working the county angle at this point. Because if you are, you get certain kinds of protections to
You
development.
mean if you're a municipal water provider?
Meaning that this is the Grand County ordinance and they can protect whatever they want to protect. And here they say they want to protect the EPA sole source aquifer. Recharge area and approved by. You don't have to be approved by the Division of Water Rights to protect the sole source aquifer from the county standpoint.
No, I don't think the Division of Water Rights even involved in such.
I would agree. So what I've done is, in the third quarter of this year, the planning commission will be reviewing this. Talk to the county engineer and the head of the planning department, Elisa Martin. We all met, talked this over, said, well, let's write it up and see how it flies. Because of course, what we would argue is we need protection for sole source aquifer over on the Moab side, and we need it for our own side. And it will do things like you can only develop, you know, if someone were to develop up there on private land, you can only go to half the units that is available under your current zone. You could require a water study. You could require a water study, but the maximum you can develop is half the units you would be able to do under zoning. It's got a series of protections. So all I'll say about this is, it was really good to do this report because kind of in the report, I said, well, you know, something could be done about this, and then we've gone ahead and done it. I also did the part for the Forest Service. We are the Moab area, the Moab geographic area, and that includes the watershed for Castle Valley and for the Moab side, and it offers a series of kinds of protections, at least verbally saying the water is kind of the most important priority. And several rules about what you can do in terms of water, in terms of how close you can camp. Having dispersed camps that have actual kind of hardened camping sites, etc. Dave may want to add to that because he and I both worked with the Forest Service and commenting as they're doing a new resource management plan for this area, which is an environmental impact statement kind of project.
Which is not completed yet.
Which is
But
not,
it's
not,
not-
it's not finally complete. They put out their kind of report, my dear wife. Is telling them that if they come out with this particular thing, they'll get sued, but that's a different issue.
And this part of it's held up
This
through
part-
all that
We have a drinking water well in Castle Valley.
in the day
Public
stuff.
supply.
Yeah, the day stuff.
Yep.
But they'd have to apply. We can't, I don't think we can use their well. That's
It's the
that's,
same aquifer.
oh, I fully
According to
agree.
what he just said, that might be all we need is that one well. It's a protected well, so. And I need to fix it.
Well, I should add that our Catholic Valley, church here is a water. By, that's what we call it. That is,
Why they get
they have a little zone protecting them, but these zones that exist, of course, on the other side, the Moab side, there are zones usually kind of around well areas, protecting the well. They are not protecting the whole watershed, so even on the Moab side, it would be a big issue to protect the watershed.
And the state law is all based upon wellhead protection. It's under the idea you have a municipal well and you're protecting it, and that makes a lot of sense. It's a point source where you're extracting from. We're trying to, this is another the square peg in the round hole thing we're trying to work through. Yeah.
Well, you
Like say
referred
with
to,
the- so a little background on the Forest Service Moab geographic area. Is the Forest Service is now operating under a new rule written under the Obama period on how they write their forest management plan. And that rule allows them to identify multiple uses and either one or a slew of multiple uses and put them with justification above the other multiple uses. So that's what the Moab geographic area is, and it's to protect recreation, the whole enchilada, climbing, skiing, all sorts of things, recreation, view shed for the national parks, so that when you're at Arches or Canyonlands and look out, the view shed's protected. And then finally, watershed protection. And Obi and I were privileged enough to be able to sit down with their hydrologist, and they actually asked us what they want, what we thought should be in the plan. It was one of those moments again, and we told them what we thought, and at the end I said, well, and why don't you put in there, if anything threatens the watershed will take precedent. And the hydrologist was like, yeah, that sounds great, yeah. I said, "Well." So we'll see, so far it's held up, and part of that is during that process, we had a lot of interaction with the San Juan County people, and they said, you guys are sure are looking into this watershed protection. I looked at their plan and I said, yeah, and you got 2,000 feet less elevation and you're south facing in Blanding. You should be looking into it too. And sure enough, they came up for a plan for themselves, which then smooths it when it gets to Salt Lake City, because it's not just Grand County, it's San Juan County too. So there you go. Little background for
Obi, you made reference to Moab's sole source aquifer.
Yes.
Do they have a designation or they just,
Yeah,
they do,
definitely,
just, okay.
there's only 3 in the entire state, but.
And 2 of them are in Grant County.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
We're number 1.
Should we, should I go on?
Sure.
So whereas the Forest Service now has one-stop shopping, they've created a part of their plan that's about watershed and resource protection and management. The BLM, it's totally different. They have nothing about watershed in any one section. They have like 13 or 15 different resource things they're looking into. And that each one covers water in there to some level, if it's appropriate or not. So way back when I was mayor, I did a word search. The BLM got me an electronic copy, or maybe I did it on the internet, but I did a word search of the whole document for watershed and watershed protection and basically that stuff. So when we came to this plan, I actually looked in my computer, and lo and behold, I found a document from like 10 years ago where I had identified all this. So it was fairly easy for me then to go back through and put this together. So the BLM doesn't really have a watershed protection thing. What they have done is they do not control hard rock mining. So that has to go through the Bureau of Reclamation. But they have some say in it, and given Castle Valley, they would be pretty against that. They do allow no surface occupancy, so if you could use a Sitla parcel or a private parcel, you could have a oil and gas well in this valley. And then access BLM resources horizontally and apply for a permit for them. But they also, there's some discretion to that, and they've indicated to me, given that they got all this land in the land swap and they manage it along with the Colorado River corridor. Because they included that in this area, in the Colorado River management, that they wouldn't do that. Well, push comes to shove, you know, who knows, but that's. They also told us that they weren't going to revisit there was no plans to revisit this management plan, and even though it's now coming up on like 15 or 20 years since they started writing it, there's ones out in the West Desert that were written in the 1980s and need to be prioritized. Moab might move up because of some other external pressure, but if it ever is, when it ever is revisited, then the town should probably try to get in and have some strong arguments about oil and gas and also about the grazing practices. But in a lot of similar places, they've eliminated grazing. I think it was so historic here that maybe they didn't want to do it. They've reduced the allotment numbers here, the AUMs. All right. So the BLM's more hodgepodge, but the general gist of it is there's very little that's gonna happen here on their lands because they manage them for scenic and recreation. The money they got for the Colorado River for this land swap with Sitla was all recreation driven money from the government. We've been very fortunate that they've decided in Castle Valley, they're gonna leave it basically the way it is. And all these like equestrian things and the improvement you see in the river corridor, those were where they can show that they use those funds and they're providing additional access for public recreation. So when we got that money, it wasn't, there were strings a little bit to get that swap done. All right, so that's basically where the BLM is at, and we have pretty good protections, but again, all of this is based on too, the town maintaining relationships with the agencies and, you know, keeping that going. Excuse me, John?
No, I'm just looking for where all this funnels upward to an updated existing ordinance.
Okay, so
Will be covered. I've lost.
This guy did the updated ordinance.
Well, the updated ordinance is coming and I haven't done it all. I've worked on it. So we'll
But
get
do I
there.
understand correctly that
So,
much about the update of our ordinance will be to dovetail with what Grand County might do?
well, okay, so I'm not gonna I don't wanna go quite there yet. So first I did the BLM. I think I've covered that. Then I looked at Sitla's policies, which are basically, they say they're above local land use codes, but they're willing to admit that some places they'll follow those codes, which and then it goes back to the county's laws if they follow. I don't want to get into the whole issue of Sitla and whether they're above or not the laws, but I learned a lot in my research, which would indicate why a lot of people have said they're not, and it just needs to be challenged. So that's something outside the meeting. The third entity I did was then the town of Castle Valley, and I opened up the watershed protection ordinance and the background, the purpose, the gist of what they were trying to do is very good and accurate. They wrote it and basically took some jurisdiction outside of the areas where we don't have jurisdiction, like we can't tell people they have to show their building permits to us if they're in Grand County, right? I mean, we can't demand that they show those to us. They're supposed to go to Grand County to get reviewed. So I realized that it was written, you know, in the early 90s or late 80s, early 90s, and it just needed to be rewritten and brought up to date, regardless of this or that. So that's in doing this process, Obi and I are to the point where we're almost done with the BLM right now. I'm trying to get a map, and supposedly it's happening, that will be a blow up, because in their in their management plan, it's such a large scale that you can't determine what is going on around Castle Valley. So I've asked them for a Castle Valley, basically 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17, it'll be digital. And showing us their land ownership, because the land swap happened after the new management plan was passed. So all the documents in the management plan do not show the land swap, yet it happened. And so that's how the land is now managed, and that's 4,000 acres out here, so it's big. So that'll show the designations, river corridor, the minerals, all that, and we'll be able to see it in the scale where we can identify parcels like up by the Porcupine Ranch, is it in? I've heard rumors, there's a few BLM parcels that aren't in the Colorado River Management Area, so we'll be able to identify that stuff. Much better. They also, the BLM, do the ownership maps for the county and this area, and I've asked them if they can to do a GIS exercise and give us the BLM's acreage, private acreage within town of Castle Valley, Forest Service acreage, and Sitla acreage. That's what I could think of. And I'm waiting on that. I've been told I'll have that within 2 weeks. So in doing the watershed protection, I think we did a lot of good stuff in getting these different agencies and their rules on paper, so it's one-stop shopping. We identified that the town's ordinance needs work on it. And we basically have, I think we're pretty far along. We understand our greatest unknown is Sitla, but we've known that all along. So that's where we're at now. What have I done with the watershed protection ordinance so far? I took out all the stuff about jurisdiction in places that the town doesn't have jurisdiction. I left all the stuff in that I found in state legislature where we might be able to assert jurisdiction within like 1.5 miles of our boundary. I looked up that legislation to make sure it was still relevant and on the books, and it is. Basically, I just started cleaning it up. I have not put in any, like, what it should be. But this was before we can even begin to work on what it should be. We kind of needed to get it cleaned up to the point we could start. So that's all I was trying to do, was build a shell that could be started from, whether I pass that off, whether a group of us work on it, however we want to go from there.
And John, I should say, probably the Grand County thing is separate from changing our ordinances. And I also should emphasize,
Will they be coordinated in any way?
Well, we might want to look at their
Yeah.
language, like on the sole source, and
Yeah.
try and mimic that, I would think.
I mean, you can't have too much protection. If you duplicate each other, that's okay too.
and I should mention what the water committee understands it. There's not a lot of private land up in here. There is some, right? And there is the Sitla parcel, which I will, I agree with Dave, it's a question whether they claim we're gonna follow Grand County process in terms of zoning, as long as they're fair to us. And
As long as they do what we want.
Yes.
but remember, so far, they have never, again, it's my understanding, they've never overruled zoning in any other place they've developed, so will be tough for them probably to do. They could do it, it could be a court case, but at least these rules would be in place that may apply to them.
All right, but so this would, for instance, if somebody proposed a development on state land, they would accept the half density.
Well, they might,
Okay,
I mean, it would say,
I mean,
if you're gonna follow us, you'd have to do the half density.
and if Grand County's got something that says for the purposes of watershed protection. In sensitive areas, you can only develop at half the density normally allowed by zoning.
Yep.
So I think Obi's opened the can enough. I'll tell the real story of Sitla. So I went in and looked at how this all came about, and I wanted to find out. Well, I went in as a developer and basically acted as if I was a developer, how I would go about developing one of their
A
pieces of
sting
property.
operation.
All right. And what I got in was the development guidelines. And there was a preamble to how the development guidelines for Sitla were created. And the preamble was that the state legislature told the director of Sitla to go write his own rules for the organization. And he wrote in there that they were above local zoning. How nice. And this has never been tested. So Bill Henry said, Brooke and Terry have said it has to be challenged. Luke Callister, a big lawyer in Salt Lake, said when we were doing the Castleton Tower thing. Well, they do not want to go to court because they'll probably lose, is what I think. And without going to court, they can have it as the big, we can do this, we can force this agenda. So you gotta flex and give us what we want, as long as you cooperate with us. So this is, because I've always heard, well, this is so nebulous whether they have this right. Well, that's it, is the legislature gave the guy the right to just write his own rules, and they've never been challenged. So, and in a private property, it all just blows my mind, but anyway.
So
Yep.
update to the ordinance going, how do we see that playing out? We need some council involvement, probably need planning commission involvement.
Yep.
Where should we take it from here?
I think we
David,
should-
want to show us what you've already cleaned up, so. we
I
have-
could send it out to you. I haven't done it yet. I mean, I need to look at it again. I've been doing this just in some free time. My back was out last week, so I stood there at the computer because that was something I could do. My suggestion would be, one, we look at a few places, both in-state and out-state, like Boulder, Colorado, and then in-state Salt Lake City, and see what they've had to write. We also want to look at smaller communities that are progressive. Park City comes to mind because they're a smaller community. With size comes some other rights to protect the watershed, which kind of makes sense, because Salt Lake City going down would be a big loss to the state. But we look at that. I also would say we get a committee to kind of talk about what we like and what we think should be in there, instead of it's not coming from just one source, because I think that'll make it a better document. I mean, obviously, I do think John's right. If we can write something that the county planning commission looks at and is similar to what they're working with, and it meets our needs, there's no reason not to use similar language and try to be in the same boat. A little bit of what has been recognized, is any of this gone through, like St. George or any of these places use watershed protection ordinances in the state of Utah, and what were the, what were good things in there? It might be worth talking to our lawyer in Salt Lake City about what they think we should put in it. Is, I mean, trying to limit the amount of time they spend on it.
Require attorney review of all of our ordinances before passing them anyway. So I would say that we start there sooner than later, so we don't waste too much time in drafting.
I would agree.
Right,
I would agree
but-
a lot.
The attorney we've used for water rights, watershed protection is a different
So if we need to.
animal. I know we might, we will.
By someone other than.
I don't know that there's not somebody in that same office. I'm just thinking that water rights is a much different matter than watershed protection, and the attorney does water rights is not necessarily going to want to or be able to comment on watershed protection.
Except they're going in and fighting or trying to support the ordinances of the communities they work with. So to some level, they have a stake in what these things say.
I'm sure there's somebody in the firm, or at least that we could be referred to.
And we might, I also, with all this stuff, since Mark Stilson is basically the gatekeeper to getting wherever we want to go, I've been in the habit of asking Mark if he has any ideas or anything like that, and any feelings, or if he knows of a good template that we might use to get started from. He has the ear of the state engineer. He seems to be in very good standing with the state engineer, and so when we have his endorsement, it makes everything so much easier.
And I would say, I mean, we plan to change very little in this ordinance. Of course, we've gotten this 8-page thing. Pretty much the ordinance is in here, except there's some stuff on constrained land that adds a little bit more protection, but we would probably try to do just a minimal change, say this This applies to the watershed of the sole source aquifer watershed. And which go all the way up in parts, so we don't get involved in a process where there's a lot of objection and stuff, just the argument that don't we want to protect our watershed the way we've talked about, you have sole source aquifer in here, and then you limit it to stuff that the state. Right, so it's probably a better political argument for us.
Okay.
I do think we have, with our unconfined aquifer, we have one subject that we haven't addressed, and that's geothermal, heating and cooling units in the ground. And they are a risk if like you have a glycol system and it breaks and you're in an unconfined aquifer, that could be a problem with contamination. So to me, that's the one
Alcohol
big,
in the water, think of the possibilities.
we're already not sounding like it. Now we got an excuse, okay. But I do think that, and that's a bigger subject than just myself, and I think it's a subject, and we need to look at what the technologies are today. Do you allow water systems and no glycols, and then how do you keep somebody from putting glycol into a system that can take either water or glycol? It's a can of worms. So anyway, I have a shallow system that doesn't work that well for the studio. I'm not that impressed with it. The deeper systems. Well, the shallow systems are a threat, but the deeper systems, if they're near a crack, are like, drilling into your vein and discharging in your vein. So there are differences in the system, and I'm not the expert. But everywhere I've gone, Ron Mengel mentioned it to me as something the town should consider. And so I just feel I have to put that out there. That would be the big thing that I saw in our ordinance. And I guess one thing I would say to the town writing this ordinance is we've been pretty righteous with the agencies around us about how they should manage for our watershed protection. And I think they're looking at us and seeing if we hold ourselves to the same bar as we're holding them, and I think we should try to do so. Anyway, that's my comments after many years of it. Thanks, Dave.
Onward,
Oh, I have a question. So who's working on this watershed ordinance?
I will I will take some time here in the next few days to make sure what I've cleaned out is ready and cleaned, because I was just going through and when I had time, so I haven't sure I have finished it and stuff. And get it to what I think is then the building blocks, and I think there's a lot of good language in there about the justifications and what we're trying to do, so I only took out the stuff that I thought we could not defend. And then we can go from there. I'm willing to be involved in the process from the Netherlands. I just think it should be. It has one author, but there should be a number of providing input or ingredients into it, because I think it's big enough subject that a few perspectives would be helpful.
And the question really is, when does it go to the park? In some sense, because,
Yeah,
I mean, if the water folks look it over and say, well, we think this is the kind of stuff that can be in it, and this may be beyond our jurisdiction. Here it is. If we get that far, of course, really the pluck that should probably do it.
Yep.
At
Tori?
that point.
Tori,
Oh, thank you. You're talking about the one that was sent out just yesterday? The watershed protection ordinance?
Yes. I didn't see it, but it's the watershed protection ordinance was what I reviewed.
And when you
It's
got,
it's just a draft that Jocelyn sent out.
yeah, Tori, what you got
That's
was,
what you cleaned up so far, that I picked out for them to see.
yeah.
You got cleaned
And I
up.
did send that to you, huh? I never thought I sent that out.
14 finished.
But that's, okay, hold on. The 14-page thing is OBMI's watershed protection draft for the watershed management plan for the town. That is different than the watershed ordinance.
Okay, that's what I was,
When I did my review in Obi, we did the review, I got the town, and so I'm the one who started reading it and going, oh, Dave, you should have been working on this when you were mayor, you know? So I did have that come to Jesus, but anyway. It was clear we needed to work on it. So I have been behind the scenes taking it and taking out the stuff I was thought was inappropriate, but I don't believe I've sent that out to anybody to see at this point.
Yes.
I will get that wrapped up and get it to you.
You clean it up, maybe the next water committee meeting, you all look at it, see what else to add to it, or
Yep.
direction for it to take, and then we can get it to the planning commission.
From there. And they can review it and decide what they want. If they wanna
what
help
else
and
we
partner,
need.
then we, okay.
thank you for that.
But at that point, I think that needs to be kind of a public process.
It sure does. We're all in agreement.
All right, we have one more weighty topic that we gotta move into. If we're complete on this. on watershed protection. The topic is strategies for maintaining town of Castle Valley water rights. In effect, how do we put water to beneficial use, more water to beneficial use with minimal impact? And let me explain, it's can be difficult to explain the whole situation, but essentially the town is and always has been between a rock and a hard place in that we have more water than we will ever use. We can never put to beneficial use. The town, before it was a town, was a ranch, and mostly it was wall-to-wall alfalfa. It was watered as alfalfa is, heavily, and water rights were applied for and granted for that purpose, and those water rights were later granted to the town. So essentially the town, with a variety of things ranging from yurts to small farmettes, is trying to use on the same land what was once used to grow alfalfa. And again, the water rights the town received were, the total is about 1,800 acre feet. And only a portion of that has been put to use to date. Back in 2009, the state moved to forfeit some of the town's water rights because they were not being put to beneficial use, and I was gone at that time, but something was not done to maintain them, and they were going to forfeit some of the town's water rights for non-use. And at the same time, they were going to forfeit, do the same thing to the city of Roosevelt up in northeast Utah. Roosevelt sued, and it went all the way to the Utah Supreme Court, which ruled that if any town holding certificated water rights cannot have them taken away, even if they're not in use.
Yeah.
It basically saved Castle Valley's ass. And we didn't, we were just a sideshow. This is about Roosevelt, but the same decision applied. And so the unused water rights held by Castle Valley were essentially safe. I think that, and the theory is, of course, that the cities and towns need to do this so they have a water bank for future development. But whatever the thinking was, the result was that the state, again, perfected certificated rights cannot be taken away once they are certificated in the hands of a water provider, whether it be a town or a district. Much as we were discussing earlier, that's the situation now. I don't expect it will last. I don't think that shield is going to last well into the 21st century. At some point, towns, water providers will have to show use of their water and perhaps a buffer beyond that for future growth. But it won't, a town like Castle Valley will not be able to keep all of its water just because it has it. And so the question becomes, how do we serve citizens who need water? How do we put water to beneficial use? And how do we do that with minimal impact? And by that, I mean, the town's service area is the town boundaries, which includes lots of land. It's not it's outside the 446 lots that can be residentially developed. If under canvas had been able to wrangle a patch of ground from the BLM within town boundaries, the town would be obliged to provide water rights to them. And so again, this is that rock and hard place that I think we're in. It's not, there's no immediate threat. It seems pretty good. Like I say, that shield created by the Supreme Court exists. But I really think we need to plan for ways to maintain water rights in the future when that shield is diminished or removed altogether. You know, and again, the secondary or maybe the primary purpose is to provide water to Castle Valley residents. One idea that occurred.
Under the safe yield concept, which is why
Yes.
we're doing all the water.
Right, and this will all get rolled into one thought or one method, one policy. Or at least, or one management plan, I guess is what we're saying. You know, and an idea that I've had for some time is to provide water to lots with poor water or the inability to get good wells. More and more when people call to ask about getting a well permit for lots high up in the rim, I say, I can do that for you. But I really recommend you look at putting in a cistern and having water delivered, because for the $30,000 or $40,000 you could set on fire, putting in a well that might not have water, and if it does, it will be likely unusable.
I know we're over time.
Yeah, and we agree on this.
Tank.
And so I think a number of people have done that. And at this point, they are hauling water from providers in Moab. I think it'd be nice if the town could find some way to deliver water to those lots from a well within Castle Valley. I had entered into discussions with the Castle Valley Fire District about the use of the well on lot 13. I attended one of their meetings via Zoom. And they agreed in principle and said I should investigate it further, which I have not done, but now they're having trouble with that well on lot 13. It had started to have sanding trouble. And they pumped it out, and you can give me an update if you're aware of it, but essentially I think it continues to be troublesome. And so I don't think we can plan on that.
We would be providing non-potable water.
Yes, that's an important distinction. This is not culinary water. It would have a big sign saying it's non-potable, skull and crossbones, whatever it takes. But it's simply for, you know, people now, I don't know how they handle their cistern water, but I assume it's not, they use non-potably, if that's a word. I mean, people,
That's not entirely
Huh?
true. That's not entirely true. I think there are some people who.
but that's at their own risk.
Yeah.
I mean, the point is that water is hauled, it's dumped into a cistern, and maybe they treat it themselves. That's certainly an option. The point is that it's just an idea for, and it wouldn't put a lot more water to beneficial use, but it would put some. You know, it would demonstrate the town's intent to put water to beneficial use. We would be fulfilling a mandate as a public water supplier by doing that. Again, it's like Dave said earlier, Castle Valley has always been an odd duck, a round peg or square peg and a round.
Between the supplier and the provider, or sorry, what was the difference then?
There's a public water supplier and there's a municipal water provider.
So is that a culinary?
No, that's more, if we went to metering and could quantify our use in gallons, we could then become a municipal water provider.
That would be the.
Yeah, and that would be the trigger, and I've never determined what any benefit is, but again, I think that you'd be.
Would there not be more of a watershed protection benefit from becoming that?
There may be, and again, but we don't even have that option until we are metering. But this is something that we were going to, Dave and I talked about investigating years ago, we just never went any further with it. To learn what the really distinctions are, what the greater benefits of being a municipal water provider might be. Again, to be determined.
I think the fundamental to maintaining the quality of the water is that we need flushing flows because of our collapsed salt zone geology to keep those bad salts to the sides. So the water needs to flush through. The state recognizes this too, as far as this quality, maintaining the water quality of an aquifer too. So from my perspective, it's really an issue of where that surplus water gets taken. We
So we
do
stick
not
on-
want it
we need to-
taken above us because we need it for flushing flows. If someone were to take it after it came out of the valley, is that really that big a deal? We didn't use it anyway, or we weren't using it. And so I think our real opportunity
But
is
look,
in order to use water rights in the future, you asked that question.
I'm getting there.
Okay, do you want me to say it?
Go ahead.
Well, is to meter, so we know what's in our
Oh, that's not
system.
what I think. Okay.
And then we can become part of it, we could join in a water bank. That the
Okay,
state
that's
wants to exist, so instead of, we're now helping the state with their water problem because we're putting our surplus water rights. So they can fit any problem, not one specific, like it goes to Spanish Valley, because then. You're building houses based on using our water rights to prove them up. But if we're helping here, there, I've heard the state talk about that.
Hold that thought,
Okay,
because I want to finish with the previous one if we can, to whatever degree we can. Again, it's an idea. It would accomplish multiple goals, but I just don't know how to do it, because especially if the well in lot 13 is really unavailable. We had the well we drilled on the cemetery lot, which.
it wasn't any good.
15 gallons a minute of.
Very poor quality.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not.
And then
pulling
just-
trucks.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, we don't have. What I'm aware of is any option for that,
Stage well.
Yeah, but I think really, I'm not, I mean, yeah, that's a mention, but I think it can be talked about, but. I think we need to put. Our monitoring well out at the end of Schaefer. I'm not in favor of the site that's there. I think it needs to go on the other side of the road, right next to the creek. Just like the Placer Creek one up at the upper 80 crossing, to see if it hits. If it hits, that's been identified by Van de Heide and Colm as the best place for us to put in a solar powered municipal well. So we would just be taking a little bit of the water out and just putting it there. Dan has a different opinion about that area and what's going on. That's why I say before we go for anything, we need to put that monitoring well in a location on the far side of the creek. My guess is that the plume is moving down the far side of the creek and
are you
not,
saying the monitoring well, but it's also a well that's pumped for delivery?
not yet, no. And what I identified for the monitoring well site was far enough away that you could have a municipal well below it and they wouldn't interfere with each other, given the site plan that Coleman Van de Heide did for me. And I even walked out there with them to go over the different things. I even talked to them about the fact that we weren't so sure that we were gonna hit the plume there, and we'd really like to know. You don't believe we're gonna hit the plume there.
I'm gonna hit sand.
Well, Willow Ways wells are some, again, we're running out of time.
Okay, so.
And I think it's an idea worth pursuing, is a well that could be used for both purposes.
Well, you can only, we're gonna need two different,
No, Janae has said, we could drill a well for to purpose like this, and she could still use it for monitoring.
Okay.
But again, I don't want to,
Okay, well, let's go to the next one. Yeah.
And just say what the town would have to do in this instance, would we have to figure out how to either truck that to people's cisterns
we have a water truck,
or
correct?
it's.
Non-potable water.
We don't know that, but that's understood.
Unless I think about.
It would be to allow for a third party to fill and deliver. That's already a water truck who provides water, instead of trucking. it.
Everything's on the table at this point.
Another.
Huge difference, that city water that's fluorinated in a sterile tank that they bring out, it's the only way you can sell the water.
Oh, right.
Is if it is city, public, provided water, we don't have that here, 7 day Mike, but, they have some issues.
So we should look at that.
Yeah, there's
You can just put well water in a tank and sell it, or I don't even know if you can give it away legally. I let people get water at my second well all the time.
right.
I hope I don't-
No, again, these are all questions that have to be answered. I'm just saying it's one idea. And it's really less about putting water to beneficial use, and it's also helping people that.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the second.
A little
one.
bit-
Yeah, let me move on, please. And the other idea, what Dave alluded to, and is, and I think it represents by far the best possibility for the town to keep its water rights and demonstrate beneficial use, which is to participate in whatever local or regional water banks emerge, which I believe they will in the years to come. I think the only solution to the Colorado River's problems are going to be water banks that let water move upstream and down. I mean, it literally, no pun intended, will be a very fluid situation. That water that is available from one place can be used in another. And you can start to see the early signs of this. Sue Belagamba from the Nature Conservancy knows a lot about it. And again, it's all very much in its infancy, but I feel like this is going to become a big part of a regional solution to the river's issues. And if the water budget study tells us we have an amount of water, of physical wet water, that we aren't going to use, and of course we'll monitor it, we'll know what we're using, we may want to participate in something like that. And because again, then it's beneficial use elsewhere. We're not opening ourselves to having to use it on as yet undeveloped areas of the town, but we get to keep the rights. And again, there's a lot, this is also, there's much that's not known about it, but I feel certain this is going to become a household word in the West in the years to come, is water banks.
And one quick caveat, when I went to that Colorado River Authority of Utah meeting, the city of Moab brought up the idea of leasing 2,000 acre feet to Spanish Valley Special Service District. And then the people there were very cynical about it, the people from the state of Utah, and they said, well, how's that working? And I said, well, we prove up these unproven water rights, and these guys would be proving them up for us, and then Moab would have these water rights. And then the lady said, so when you take back the water, what's gonna happen to those people? Do they have an alternative source of water? And David Everett's face kind of dropped, and she said, I don't think the state engineer, that's uncharted territory, you using some community to prove up your water rights and then taking them back. So what I'm getting at is there's a subtle difference between giving Mark Stilson the right in the division of water rights to move the water around the system as they see needed versus us writing a contract with Spanish Valley, for instance, or one community where we earmark it. So we have to be very careful how you participate in the water bank, but basically you're participating in it with no strings attached. You put the water in and they make the decisions where it's best and most beneficial for the state of Utah. Then I think you can play in one of these things successfully. If you try to do it where it's too lucrative to the town and you tie it to something like a special, I think they'll take it at the end, the state decides. And as we've learned that everything can move.
Yes, and because there's always irony built into this is the kind of thing that can actually facilitate lunacy like the St. George pipeline. You know, there's just no easy answers. But again, and you see this happening, it's already happening in some places on a sort of case-by-case basis. In the Front Range of Colorado is engaged in water banking with people who own land and water rights out in the Eastern Plains. And again, it's every situation at this point is kind of custom built, but I have a feeling there's going to be a standard method that's going to be developed by the River Compact, by state agencies like the Division of Water Rights in Utah to make water use essentially more efficient.
But of course, these are not. These issues can be combined so that the kind of argument that says, which I really like, that's gonna have to keep enough water flowing to keep the salt bay is a good one.
Right.
And the fact that then you can water bank or let people have the water after it goes through the valley.
Right, but the argument.
Is a good one. They're, you know, kind of, yeah, they go together.
Yes, and that becomes the argument. We have to keep a certain amount of our water rights to keep our system flush.
Yeah.
And again, but when it flushes out, it's available.
And it's such a hard determination from a chemical scientific to figure out exactly what that cusp is of how much flushing flow. Let's not even get into the issue where we screw it up. Let's just let you take it after it comes out and you put it to use. It's horrible.
Great Cliff says the worst water I've ever encountered.
Who?
Great Cliff,
Red Cliff Ranch.
And where are they getting it?
from a well next to the creek.
And,
Creek water is
and
the same horrible quality,
it,
because the commingled water from Castle Valley is useless. Can't do anything with it.
so that, I mean, but they could, you could, I mean,
You could
in a
drink seawater.
perfect world,
If
just.
you can dump it into the river and
And
dilute
then it-
dilute it there and take it out of Las Vegas.
You could find it from right where it comes out of Castle Valley through the notch here, where it's still good, where it's leaving right at the bottom of the valley. Is it still good there? Is it already
You know,
continuing?
as it narrows down here, it gets narrower and narrower with a good band of water. And then it's all commingled. It's like an underground cesspool.
Yeah,
And then it pours over the notch in the rock, which you
Right.
can visibly see on the surface, is also occurring below in the water from Castle
So
Valley.
it goes in the river and goes down to some bioengineered cotton field and, Arizona, you know.
Well, it's all down in that Cutler formation when it goes down there.
So
So it's no wonder.
from the budget study that's being conducted now.
That's,
A lot more about safe yield, and then we can start to make decisions about where we're going.
I guess the important thing is everybody understand the conundrum with our water rights. And the kind of fine line that has to be walked to maintain them without actually facilitating things we don't want to see happen here in Castle Valley.
Well, we have, and there's, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be happening here that would be okay, that aren't too.
yeah.
I mean, we have agricultural zoning as part of our zoning.
But look at the pattern of development. It will never come close to what the alfalfa rate.
Or secure.
Well, I think the acreage, the price of real estate here.
There aren't
is
enough
not
goats
gonna
in
become a
Utah.
farm. It's not, I mean, it could have fun.
With that.
John, I like your water truck idea. You're just gonna have to treat the water. My understanding is, I talked to a couple different engineers who said there's no source protection zone wide enough for the
No,
transitivity of our.
I agree with you. I think that will,
Like Dave's water that's awesome and drinkable, clear with some chlorine and holdover
Right.
tank, and then.
no, yes, like a clear well for the treatment. The town of Quebec, just north of where I now live. Has a facility, it's right next to the river, the Colorado River. And it's just, anybody people can pull in. With, tank trucks and whatnot, and it's been basically put a credit card in.
Yeah.
Or dollar bills or whatever, and you can fill tanks, and that's people self-serve.
Yeah.
But again, it's taken from the river, it's treated, it's in a building. A third the size of this room.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say that pumps the water from the river, treats it, and then makes it available through a spigot.
If
So-
Dave's water was in a tank at his house, the gravity down here, we would have over 100 PSI of free water from the tank. That would be chlorinated with
No, I,
adequate holdover time for city water municipality. We're gonna have to treat the water because the aquifers.
Yep.
The water is moving too fast underground around here
Right.
for the protection zone to work. So you treat it, but you have free gravity. And we could do booster stations, but you
are
could,
they charging for gravity yet?
you could just, you could fill the water off of that trunk line, or simply put it in your truck from the tank,
Right,
initially, we would.
no, there's lots of ideas.
Beautiful thing to have water provided to the upper lots with actual Castle Valley water.
I agree
Not
completely,
produce-
that's really what motivates me in all this is. It's just too bad they gotta haul from town when there's lots of water out here.
Dangerous road, that guy leans over into my lane all the time.
Right, it's needed, what, 8,000 gallons of water rolling over,
So I want to make sure we don't have any more questions.
8,000 pounds, excuse me.
Planning commission, council members, about anything you guys have brought up information tonight. Tori, did you have any other questions? Sorry, I see you're stretching there.
The only question I have is how can you bank water from Castle Valley to somewhere else?
Because it
Like-
leaves the valley, and if you can quantify what's leaving the valley, it goes into the river, great big regional plumbing system. And then it can be pumped out in Moab, or Las Vegas, or the Central Arizona project. And anywhere that water can be taken from the river, that's where our water goes.
All right,
And,
thank you.
I think the most logical use for it, when in reality is the state has to make sure X amount of water gets to Lake Powell, and that can be part of their allotment to get into Lake Powell. To be honest, because it's not very good quality, it's all those things we've talked about, Moab's the only one who could extract it. And so it's either going down to Lake Powell and part of the allotment, but don't underestimate the value of that. The state has to meet their commitments in the compact, and that's only gonna get tighter. It's not gonna get looser.
Yeah,
Well, it depends on the election.
pretty much everything we've talked about is trying to address what we believe are future climate and population trends and what it's gonna mean for water.
The isotope study, that would tell us how much is actually leaving the valley.
It will go a long ways towards that. What it will do more is tell us what the sources of water are and how they mingle and travel through the valley.
Okay,
It'll create a dynamic model, which will help us again determine safe yield and how to maintain safe yield. Yes, but somewhere out of all this, we will come up with a number that says this is how much is leaving the valley.
And that,
Something that should be authoritative enough that we could take it to a water bank and say,
Right.
make a deal.
and in combination with that gauge, you can see that gauge coming back in is super important, right?
Yeah.
And that shows what comes out of Castle Valley, whatever quality is, it's pretty, it's most of the water going out there. There may be a bit of groundwater, but most of it's.
Can't be any worse than what we send to Mexico.
Nope.
A lot of groundwater.
thank you for that explanation.
What you find down here?
Georgia, do you have questions?
I'm guessing most of this stuff, as far as the ordinance and everything else, is going to be kind of dependent upon the water study. So is that a long ways out or
I think the watershed protection ordinance is not as dependent.
not as? dependent?
No, in fact, it's nearly independent.
Okay. And
Well,
then-
It's certainly-
management plan type stuff is a little more related to that, But we've got an unconfined aquifer, no matter how much water is running through it, and we wanna protect it.
Yeah.
And I think we're all in the room and are fully in agreement, and so it's not really.
And as far as the management plan, I mean, we need to get it done. I predicted.
Yeah.
I've been wrong so many times, I can't dare predict again, but we need to get it done, if only so we can get input from the public and the council as to what to pursue and what not to pursue. It's a plan, but you know,
Well, and it's a plan that I see the council adopting, so there needs to be some involvement. before
yes, the
it's
council will
finalized.
adopt it, but almost certainly not without some suggestions and modifications and again, public input. Right, exactly. And so.
Yeah.
We can't really do anything until we get it done, because we won't know what we're doing. So,
Part of this is driven by Janae Wallace, who's retiring soon from UGS, and she's been really good to us, and she.
we should
won't-
get a bronze statue of her.
Yeah.
Put it up in front of the building.
And Mark Stilson has indicated things like the municipal he's in support of, the totalizers, instead of having to put something in. I mean, he's a reasonable man, so we kind of feel like these opportunities are there, and with all the pressures in the whole basin and in Salt Lake. And we're ahead. This is one place we're ahead of most of Utah, and so maybe we can get some resources to help lessen the burden on the community at the same time we move forward. And heck, let Mark use us as an example.
And David's
Yes,
making a good point. That we'd be wise to do as much as we can while dealing with people that we already know who know us. You know, before there's a changing of someone retires or someone gets promoted. We have people that we know we can work with that are used to our idiosyncrasies and I think we'd be wise to deal as much as possible with them.
Questions from the public, do you wanna give your email that they can send those to?
Sure.
So what would be the best, or do you have time, do you feel?
I'm
like
willing to, I don't feel like I need to stop talking.
Okay, so Egmont, did you have something online there?
Just a brief question. I had some problem with the audio, so I'm not sure if I got everything, but I got the gist. and it appears that the metering is a big issue and should be considered. And I was wondering if somebody is researching that already, or if you could take on more contributions like from me.
Absolutely.
Sounds like they're open, Eggmont. I have some.
Oh, yeah, no, the answer to your question is, it's been researched very lightly. It exists as an idea, but I would welcome ideas for. I would welcome specific information about these ideas we talked about. An inexpensive way to measure the amount of time a pump runs.
Yeah.
Inexpensive, I assume, also including not very intrusive, as in just being clamped on or something like that. So it's
Believe me, as simple as easy on the property owner as we can make it. And still be an effective means of measuring. Again, inexpensive, I realize, is relative. But again, we just want something that will satisfy the division of water rights. And I would love ideas, because there are people that know much more about this than I do. And I'm sure you're one of them.
And realizing you guys that you give us ideas and we're very open to them, but we're gonna run them by Mark Stilson in the Division of Water Rights to make sure it's gonna meet what they need. Because there's no point in us doing anything or spending tax money without having their approval, because they basically decided if we've met the bar or not met the bar.
Thank you. Egmont, you have something else?
I'm talking about helping with research also. So I'm, yeah, if I could do it, please let me know.
I would love to have your help.
Thank you.
That's a yes. Thank you.
That's an emphatic yes.
And you can tell everybody to use as much water as they can.
Wonderful.
So I have a question with all of the other people out there that are remote. Everybody in the room is buzzing when they speak on my computer. So, I mean, I'm just wondering if it's my computer or other people.
Right, it was just that there were several people talking at the same time.
No,
So-
it's like a vibration in the microphone.
Or speakers may have blown out.
Yeah.
Is it a good vibration?
Tori, come down here next.
Jasmine, it's a chronic issue.
Is it fun?
Yeah.
Okay, so wait a minute. Now that's better.
Okay, somebody touched the.
Thank you, Dave.
Dave moved it.
They did a healing.
Dave,
Now I can't hear anything.
We good now?
There you go. Okay, now speak, John.
What?
Nobody talked. Let's mess with her.
You wanted to test me to see if.
Oh, that's way better. Okay, thank you. Next time I'll do it in the beginning and not listen to y'all buzz up.
All right, yeah. Did you guys have any questions before you took off?
If you guys had any questions for me, I just thought I'd stop by and
I appreciate that.
my friend.
If you'd like to share the Hobbs meter with us by email or something.
Again, is that a sort of a generic trade term, or is that a specific?
Specific brand that aircraft use, but they also. make I could put one, it's just a timer. When there's electricity running to it, it's counting hours. Tobacco.
Yes.
That has an hour. We just need 100 and, either 220 or 110 volt version that when the pump is on and running, and then I can look in a book and tell them the average gallons per minute that model of pump pumps. And we can get a pretty accurate, overall annual depiction of their water use.
Right, and I think twice annually, we.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's the issue. You're not gonna afford to go drive through with an FM receiver like Rocky Mountain Power. You're gonna.
No, we'll take direct readings,
So
but.
that would be the least intrusive, just a wire, we just need to size the pump correctly. We could do something like that.
No, again, that's exactly what I had in mind, so.
on our own.
Okay.
But there's ideas like that that would be super easy, be after the points.
Well, in realizing also that this is going to be to some people kind of shocking, and we need as a community to go try and sell why this is important, and it isn't about like interfering with your water consumption.
Now,
You just heard him say,
We're not using.
you literally, the more water you use annually, the better, because we're not gonna have all these lots built out before they come down, like John was saying, and they remove our ability to reserve that long-term right without actually using it. But if we have, you know, a pretty rough high number of what we're using, then there will be enough excess for the remaining houses when they're built
But we
to
still have to do
utilize
that
them. This is
without
right,
compromising the safe yield.
yeah.
Which is what we
And one thing the state responds to is due diligence.
We're probably
Come up 18 feet since they shut off the fields, the alfalfa fields, you know, this guy could confirm those numbers, they go up and down, but the overall average a decade ago was 18 foot, how much higher it's come. You know, we had a very extended drought as of last year, was the end of the drought, so those numbers would be interesting to me. We're never gonna pump that same rate.
No,
Ever. And the wells farther up the hill get better quality the more they pump, because that water moving from Grandstaff Canyon area, it's very slow migration compared to the fast water. If you pump higher on the hill, the quality of water seems to go in that direction.
we will never pump anywhere near the total quantity that Rand wants to, but the pattern
The
of
pattern's
pumping,
different, yeah.
where we're taking what we used to be taking from what, 4 places.
5 or 6.
well, yeah.
And now it's taking,
Okay, we talk about my well is 375 feet deep. The water level is 86. So how deep, they were pumping so hard out of that well, they needed all that.
that will produce 1,300 gallons a minute.
You got it, I mean, the thing
This
was,
is a lot.
so they were affecting the hydrology of the valley with that well.
But the nearest one is Schaefer Lane, they never, you know, they care.
But the point Jazz makes is, yes, we want people to use water. We've got to be careful that one person in one area isn't pumping so much they're impacting their neighbors' wells. That's the main
And let's
thing.
face it, we wanna,
So, you know, that's the balance act of it, and then the overall pumping doesn't interfere with the overall health of the system. One theory I've had that's kind of, you know, is that climate change is actually benefiting the town's water supply. Because more water is coming down during the winter when it's not being extracted by surface users for irrigation and falling into the aquifer. And we're not seeing these extreme drought drops in our valley, which in most places with a drought like this, you'd be seeing more influence. So these are things we have to watch. That's just an informal observation of thinking about it and watching it and thinking about this in this valley a lot. That doesn't mean it's accurate, and I think it's something that hopefully will come out a little bit in the study, isotope study through, you know, where our supplies of water are coming from and all that. So anyway, but just thinking about, you know, putting out knowledge of the valley, or at least thoughts of the valley that this community needs, that shouldn't just be in 1 or 2 heads and things like that. So that's why I add these things, so
Let
that.
me just make sure no one else online had anything before we wrap up. Mitch, Anna, or Dana, did you have any questions for any of these guys while you're here? Go ahead, Dana.
I think they're asleep.
No, they just unmuted.
Dana, we can't hear you. Is
Do you have something, Dana?
that my neighbor,
I don't know.
Rogers?
I don't know. There's no last name. If you're talking, your mic might not be working. You can also try typing something in the chat. And everyone is welcome also to send us email questions. This is the first of what I see to be many of these workshops as we start working through these water
right, we'll just
issues.
we refine these ideas.
Right, as we refine the ideas, and then, okay, thank you, Dana. We do intend to have workshops that are more oriented towards public input as well. This was just a preliminary workshop that I wanted information for the council and the planning commission, and there's a lot of information here, so
I'm gonna go home, sorry, Dave, we'll chat soon.
thank you.
This is my good friend Brian Martinez.
Hi, Brian.
Manager of NAVTech, got a couple of kids. My kid's age and friend a long time, he's running for commissioner at large. So I just want to come down and see what's going on and do the model. Yeah, thank you. You guys for having me. Well,
You probably know.
good to tell you guys. She's my right hand in the office. Hi.
Again, I think we're always interested in your field observations. I mean, so we're talking, we do science and then we try and do field observations, the back the science and ground truth it. And we're trying to do this obviously as a town without a huge budget to do it all on. So anyway, we appreciate your ideas, Egmont.
Thanks
You
for all
got
your
a
work.
good brain. We certainly are interested in your technical, yeah.
Taking those bags of cutting. Every time something happens, my bag deserves.
Sorry.
Go ahead. and-
Hey, Mike, I'll talk to you about that meter.
Who would I have to contact
Go ahead, Egmont. Take it off.
about contribution?
Here's what we can potentially access.
What is- what-
For us, where can we- I read that potentially we can go up on the BLM above my house, where UOL is, and then we can even verify.